Welcome, my friends, to Dr. Frank Cutting Edge Medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Miller, coming to you from San Antonio, Texas. We're talking about all kinds of health and wellness activities and techniques on this show, and it's brought to you by O3 Plus Texas, which is our health, wellness, and longevity clinic here in San Antonio, Texas. Today we have in the studio Dr. Pawluk, who's going to be telling us a lot about pulsed electromagnetic therapy, and also Kim Engelman, who's my nurse practitioner, who basically helps to run the clinic. So today I thought we'd start with a prayer, and here we go. God, you made the proton and the electron with positive and negative charges. You stuck them together and made atoms, molecules, and then us. Help us to understand how our electrical charges and ions can be influenced by magnetic fields so we can enjoy better health and longevity. We thank you, God. Amen. Okay, so last week we talked about the benefits of melatonin with Dr. Ryder. So if you missed that, please go to the website for the radio show, which is www.DrFrankCuttingEdgeMedicine.com. That's DrFrank CuttingEdgeMedicine.com. Push the button that says radio shows, and then you can see and listen to all the previous radio shows. Plus, we'll have the links from things that we talk about on this show, plus all the links from the previous shows that are on there. So even if you're driving, you don't have to be punching too many buttons. Just when you get home, go look on your computer and you can find all the information that you need. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest today, who is Dr. William Pawluk. Bill, say hello.
Hello, everybody. I've been to San Antonio once. Love it. Love it.
Good.
But
and
I think it's a bit too hot for me.
Aren't you in Baltimore area?
I'm in the Baltimore area, yes.
Okay. So we met Dr. Pawluk about 4 or 5 years ago at a conference called StopMed, which was one that was investigating all kinds of technologies that are not mainstream medicine. It's how they can help people stay healthier. And we went to one of his courses on pulsed electromagnetic fields. So it was a fascinating course, and we found out that he had also been on the Dr. Oz show about 5 years ago when Dr. Oz was talking about PEMF, pulsed electromagnetic fields. So, Bill, how did you get into this? I think you went to medical school in Canada, is that right?
Correct. I grew up in Calgary, Canada, went to medical school at the University of Alberta. Then I was on faculty at at McMaster University in Canada. Then on faculty at Case Western University, Rutgers University, Hopkins, and University of Maryland. So I've done tours in academic medicine as well as being a practitioner, a family physician by background.
Excellent. And so what was your first experience with PEMF magnets, either static or dynamic?
Well, as a family doctor, obviously you see a lot of pain patients. And I was actually the medical director of a group of around 30 practitioners. And I had the largest family medicine group on the whole East Coast. We had 14 family doctors in our group.
Wow.
And so we shared patients, we shared hospital duties and so on. And we had, in a short space of time, we had a number of admissions of people with GI bleeding, gastric bleeding. And one of them almost died. And the common cause was ibuprofen. Right? And subsequently, I found out that about 16,000 people a year die from ibuprofen, gastric bleeding. And then if you add in the kidney disease that happens with all that stuff, too, with people who are using a lot of these medications, then you're talking close to 30,000 people who have complications and can die annually of those drugs. So I said, at the time, basically, I said, I have to find a different solution. This is stupid medicine. What's the definition of insanity?
Keep doing the same thing over and over and expect different results.
Or, in this case, expecting no side effects, right? No trauma, no damage. Well, that is still stupid medicine. So I said, I got to find something different to do, so I decided to study acupuncture. Going outside the box. So I'm leaving my peers behind in the dust. I'm going somewhere else where they throw needles at people. And then I came back after my training and discovered that people didn't want needles. Now, that was 1990.
Okay.
So, since then, Madonna appeared in a movie and had needles all over the place, and that sort of broke the ice. More or less. That's the way I would describe it.
If only she came out with a magnet on her.
Not then. Too late. Too late, my brother.
So after that, so you were looking for other ways to handle pain besides taking medications and now besides acupuncture? So
what happened is that with acupuncture, because people were not wanting the needles. They wouldn't accept the needles because nobody else was doing it. So there was no sort of peer acceptance of public acceptance of acupuncture at the time. So I said, well, got to be another way to do acupuncture, and discovered it in the Orient. They had used magnets on acupuncture points. Korea is very common to use magnets on acupuncture points, and you could put small magnets or tiny little magnets that are probably about not quite even a quarter of an inch, smaller than that, on an acupuncture point and get an acupuncture-like effect.
Wow.
So you all have to ask yourself, well, why can a magnet on an acupuncture point affect the acupuncture point? Well, since then, we've discovered there's lots of science about this now, and I teach a whole-day course like we did in Utah at SOPMed, teach a whole-day course on how you can combine acupuncture with magnetic field therapy. Anyway, the magnets do work on acupuncture points, and they do very similar sorts of things. So you can use lasers, light, friction, heat, color therapies, all sorts of things will stimulate an acupuncture point because it's an electrical system. It's a DC current system.
Okay.
And therefore, because it follows the laws of electricity, it is subject to influence by magnetic fields.
Okay.
That's a natural law of physics.
So how is it affecting the body? What does a magnetic field do?
All right. Well, one of the key actions of magnetic fields on the body is it affects the electrical activity of the body. So a magnetic field passing through the body, it passes all the way through. The body does not exist to a magnetic field. It doesn't care about the body. It doesn't care what the tissue is. It doesn't care how big it is or wide it is or what's going on in it. But as it's passing through, it starts to activate ions in the tissues. It activates currents. So it begins to increase charge. It increases energy in the body.
And energy is the key, right?
That's the key. That's the key. Now, there are probably other actions, quantum physics actions of PEMFs as well, but for the most part, what we understand the best is the fact that magnetic fields stimulate charge. I'll give you an example. You know, today we're using devices called NeuroStar for treatment-resistant depression to stimulate the brain to try to relieve depression.
That's the transcranial magnetic
stimulation, exactly. Right. That's called RTMS. Well, why? Why are they doing that? Because when you put a big magnet on a person's head and stimulate it at a high frequency, or a relatively high frequency, you actually increase charge. And they've mapped these electrical charges that build up in the brain. And that causes essentially a reset. RTMS was designed largely to replace ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, which is barbaric. It's electrocution, basically. Controlled electrocution, just like we do with putting paddles over people's chests for resetting their hearts.
So when a person has transcranial magnetic stimulation, do they feel it?
They may feel something, but it's not like having a shock.
Right, nothing like the electroshock therapy.
Nothing like electroshock therapy. Absolutely nothing like that at all.
So they don't have to be put to sleep or anything else like that?
Not one bit. Not one bit. So magnetic fields, we know, go all the way through. They do increase charge, and the charge aspect of it is used in this transcranial stimulation. But the charge that they are looking for is very concentrated, very local to the magnet. But once you initiate a charge in a brain, in any tissue of the body, any organ in the body, that charge goes zoop all the way through the head, all the way through the brain, all the way through the spinal cord. So it produces all these downstream actions.
So you're saying that if you get the magnet on your brain, it can still affect your entire body?
Well, absolutely, because what drives the body?
Well, the brain, yes. But, I mean, it went down the spinal cord even, right? It
can go down the spinal cord. So TMS is now being used for all sorts of neurological issues. It's not just for transcranial. So you can use it along the spinal cord anywhere. Okay,
so that's one use. What about using it for pain and things like that?
That's probably the most common reason why people gravitate to PEMF therapy, because it's so safe. It has no side effects. It's not toxic. And because magnetic field therapy has a natural pain-killing effect. Some studies have shown that it has an effect equivalent to about 10 milligrams of morphine.
Wow. That's amazing.
Even in snails.
How do they measure that in a snail?
Well, I'm glad you asked. So what happens is you put a snail on a hot plate.
Poor thing.
Well, if you don't get it up too high, don't leave them on there too long. Otherwise, you have snail food.
Escargot.
So what they do then is they put the snails on the hot plate, turn up the heat, and see how long it takes for the snail to get off. Because they'll crawl off. The heat becomes uncomfortable. So what they do then is they give them small amounts of analgesics. In this case, we talked about opium or morphine.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they found is that it takes about 10 milligrams of morphine before the snail will not get off.
Okay.
And when they did magnetic field therapy, it basically did the same thing.
Wow.
So that's where
how about in humans?
So in humans, it has a natural pain-killing effect as well. But the problem in humans, a snail is a very simple organism. So why does pain happen in a human?
Well, anoxia, lots of cytokines in there and everything.
Burns.
Right.
Right.
All kinds of cell damage.
Cell damage, a knife, a needle, a cut, right? And trauma, stabbing, but also just crushing a tissue, tearing something, breaking a bone. All of that is causing pain through all the mechanisms you described. The cytokine releases, but also tearing nerves, impacting nerves. So the nerves are the first to feel it. Right? So once you start magnetic field therapy, it kind of what we call depolarizes those nerves.
Okay.
It makes the nerves less excitable. And that produces by itself a pain chilling effect. So you're releasing endorphins, you're releasing enkephalins, all the brain stuff that you're doing with magnetic field therapy. Now we're discovering that magnetic field therapy actually acts on the endocannabinoid system.
Wow.
So we're not only acting on the opioid system, which is important for pain and our own natural pain-killing capacity, but we're now also acting on the endocannabinoid system, basically the mechanisms of marijuana.
Right.
Right? And the endocannabinoid system is, why do we have an endocannabinoid system? It's not because humans grew up using marijuana. Right? It's just like why do we have an opioid system? And why do we have a system for Valium in our brains, in our bodies? Because there are receptors that have those functions, and we just simply found a drug that matches those functions.
Gotcha.
Unfortunately, we found out after the fact that we had Valium receptors too.
Well, the nice part is if the magnets work for all those different things, then you don't have to take any of those drugs, potentially.
Theoretically, and that's the value of it. So sometimes you're going to use the drugs temporarily while the body begins the healing process. So magnetic field therapy may not be strong enough to have the same potency as a narcotic at that moment. But our goal is not just to relieve the pain. Our goal is to actually try to heal the cause.
Right.
Because if you don't heal the cause, the pain comes back.
Okay.
That's why you need to keep using narcotics all the time. Because you're not relieving the problem. I call it numbing and dumbing.
So we have magnets here at O3 Plus. We have a couple of different systems, and I think you had mentioned in the talk that you need different types of systems for different injuries or functions that you're trying to attain. So tell us a little bit about those. So
we have on DrPawluk.com, DrPawluk.com, my website. As a family physician, we always are looking for tools to expand our tool chest. Right? That's why you have these magnets in your practice, and you have other tools as well. Because not everything that we do will solve all problems. And no single magnet will solve all problems. So as I began working with magnetic fields, I discovered this one would do this one would do that, another one would do something else. Somebody needs a whole body system, somebody needs just a local system, somebody needs something really high intensity to the brain. So you accumulate different magnets to do different tasks. So if you have a head injury, then I'm going to recommend a system for you that's going to be higher intensity. If you have a small cut, I'm going to be recommending something very small that you can wear until the wound heals itself, because the wound will heal typically twice as fast as it would normally heal if you use magnetic field therapy after you have a wound. So every system will have its benefits. High-intensity systems are important in medical practice settings because you're charging people by the minute. You're charging them for the time they're spending getting their therapy, and insurance doesn't normally pay for it.
Do they pay for any of them?
There are some that are FDA approved, but most of the systems that I work with are not, because what happens is if you get FDA approval for something, you get locked in. You can only use it for one indication.
That specific device for that indication, and that's all you could claim.
Exactly. Unlike drugs, unlike medications, you and I prescribe medications what we call off-label all the time.
Correct.
Right? But you can't do off-label treatment with a magnetic therapy device. Or at least the manufacturer can't sell it to you for off-label use. The government controls.
We can still use it. We just have to have them with a consent form so they know that it's not FDA approved, but we think it might help them.
Exactly. So the problem is the doctors who have these devices that are FDA approved don't think outside the box because they don't understand magnetic field therapy. And they don't understand all the different mechanisms of action of magnetic fields. So they tend to think of it, I'm just going to use it for this non-union fracture, a fracture that won't heal. Mm-hmm. Or I'm just going to use it for treatment-resistant depression. They don't think about all the other possibilities. And I discuss all those possibilities on my website, drpawluk.com, but I also wrote a book called Power Tools for Health.
Good.
And there are 50 diseases that I discuss where I actually provide the research evidence for help with that disease.
So we will post a link to your book so that people can purchase it. I guess you can get it on Amazon?
Yes, you can.
Or from your website?
Or the website, but yeah, you can order from Amazon. You can get the ebook on Amazon.
Good. So with those 50 different conditions, and each one has like maybe a different magnet with it?
No, see, let me go back to another point that's in the book, which is what we're sort of talking about a little bit here, which is the mechanisms. So in the book, I reviewed 25 different mechanisms of action, and actually the book does not talk about endocannabinoids. And another really, really, really important mechanism that I discovered since the book is published is about the adenosine receptor.
Oh, right. They talked about that one.
How important that is for inflammation.
Yeah, they talked about that one in Cuba, actually, as to how ozone helps with injections into lumbar disc disease. The adenosine receptor, yep.
And the adenosine receptor helps to decrease inflammation. So PEMFs have been found to be optimal in terms of reducing adenosine at about 15, reducing pain through the adenosine receptor, reducing inflammation through the adenosine receptor at 15 Gauss. So now magnetic fields drop off very rapidly with intensity as you move away from the applicator, just like you get with sound and light and heat and cold and so on. That's called the inverse square law. And we use that law
before we go further, can you explain what Gauss is and what's Tesla?
So Gauss is a common term for magnetic field intensity. It was named after Friedrich Gauss, a mathematician. Tesla is from the guy named Tesla who developed AC. All of our AC power comes from that person, Tesla, the discoverer. He's a researcher. And so AC is basically pulsing fields that are constantly changing. They're dynamic. They're constantly moving.
Okay.
DC is static magnets, fridge magnets. Okay. The little magnets you put on the back of a card or something like that to keep the card on the fridge.
Correct.
That's DC. So
what's the difference but pulsed electromagnetic field, is that DC or AC?
Pulse is always it's not AC necessarily. So AC means alternating current, which means that the electrical current basically changes polarity, goes from positive to negative. That's AC, and our power lines are AC. But you can pulse a current through a wire with DC, where it's just directly continuing to go through the wire. Mm-hmm. And anytime you move current through a wire, you create a magnetic field. That's what our power lines are doing. They're creating magnetic fields. But you don't have to have AC to create a magnetic field. You can have pulse DC. So instead of alternating like a wave on a pond, right, you're just basically, it's like flat. Or you could watch a little fish or a torpedo going across the pond.
Okay.
Straight across.
So how does all that affect the healing?
Pulsed magnetic fields, the most important difference between static magnetic fields and what we call time-varied magnetic fields. The magnetic fields are varying with time. So AC and DC pulse fields are varying with time. Magnets don't. That's why they're DC in a sense. They're static. So alternating current versus pulse is that you're changing polarity to a great extent. And a pulse means that you're just simply going bang, bang, bang. So an example that I use, I'm going to pound on my desk. So, that would be alternating.
Okay.
Okay. A pulse is
All right.
Right? So some people call them hummers and ringers. So a ringer is hitting a gong, and a gong rings. And every time you hit it, the gong rings. Right? And a hummer is like songs, all kinds of tones and frequencies.
So does each one of those have a different effect on the body?
Varying effects.
Mm-hmm.
The key effect for the body has to do with something we call dB/dt. So that's Faraday's law. The intensity of the magnetic field, the rise of the magnetic field, dB, d-sense is a scientific symbol for change, delta,
Mm-hmm.
and B is the scientific symbol for magnetic field intensity. So dB, change in intensity, divided by dt, change in time.
Okay.
T is the symbol for time. So when you have a pulse going up, it takes time for that pulse to reach its peak from the bottom to the top. It's not possible to create a pulse that's zero time.
Right.
That truly would be DC. That's what a static magnet is. The magnetic field is just there.
Right.
All right. So anytime the magnetic field goes up over a period of time, it creates a stimulation in the body, and that's what induces charge in the body. So you're actually producing charge in the body. The body produces the charge. The magnetic field is simply the stimulus for the charge to be produced.
Okay.
That's one of the beauties of magnetic fields, is the magnetic field is not doing the job. It's providing the stimulus for the body to do the job. And that's why magnetic fields are so safe.
Okay, so let's take some examples. Like let's go back to where you had a broken bone. So you would want a pulsed electromagnetic field on there, and does it matter? I guess it matters how long it's near the bone, right?
So the closer it is to the site of injury, the more dynamic the action is. And then following the adenosine receptor, the law basically saying that you need 15 Gauss optimally to produce the best effect on reducing inflammation. So when you have a fracture, automatically you have inflammation.
Gotcha.
Right? Because you need inflammation, acute inflammation, to help to heal the fracture.
Right.
But you don't just have a bone fracture. You've torn a lot of stuff along the way.
Ligaments,
tendons, muscles,
yep.
Skin, you name it, nerves. So a lot of damage is happening in the area of the fracture. We are more concerned about the fracture, but really we often have to be more concerned about the secondary damage, which is actually the primary damage, because that happens before the fracture happens.
Right.
Right?
So, and the time, I think you had mentioned something the other day on the phone. Once you get the therapy, it continues for a while, but you have to keep applying it. Is that correct?
Yeah, because magnetic fields have at least 25 different actions. Every one of those actions has its own sort of timeline, like throwing a rock on a pond. So, for example, if you throw a pebble in the pond, it's going to produce small waves. If you throw a rock on a pond, it's going to produce bigger waves. So the waves are the actions that proceed from that stimulus that move along, and that they eventually extinguish. Some of those actions extinguish in seconds, milliseconds. Some of those actions, like inflammation, can go on for hours at a time. Pain reduction can be momentary, or it can last for a long time. And whether it lasts for a long time or not depends on what else is happening that's causing the pain.
Okay. So in general, how long would you need to use a magnet, say, for a broken bone and all the associated injuries there?
Well, I don't have an answer for that. Okay, but I have an idea, and the answer is going to come from the person's own body.
Okay.
The body will tell you what it needs. Generally speaking, again, using dB/dt
right
as the way to think about it, the stronger the magnetic field, the stronger the actions are going to be, and the longer they are going to last. Small pebble in a pond, big rock in a pond.
So you could use a large magnet for a shorter time period, or a small magnet, and you have to use it more continuous.
For a longer periods of time to get similar kinds of effects. Now, the FDA, one of the FDA-approved devices for healing non-union fractures, was only about 40 Gauss, 50 Gauss.
Wow!
And in the early days, when they were using them for non-unions, they were wearing these devices 12 hours a day.
That's difficult.
Now, more recently, newer devices have come out that the FDA has approved also for non-union fractures, and they only were used like 4 hours a day.
Okay.
So you have to apply the magnet right over the site, and the person has to either sit there. If it's battery operated, you can walk around. But if it's plugged into the wall, then you're going to have to sit there to do your treatment.
Okay. And that should be able to get you your 15 Gauss to the site of the fracture and get the healing that they had shown worked.
Well, again, depending on the fracture. So if you have a femoral fracture, a femur, or if you have a vertebral fracture,
right,
you got to go a lot deeper into the tissues to be able to deal with it.
Okay.
Pelvic fractures are also difficult to deal with because depending on where they are on the pelvis, they can be like a pubic bone will be shallow, but the ilium or the deeper, lower down bones, sacrum, coccyx is relatively superficial. But so basically, you have to know where the fracture is to know what the intensity of the field is going to be that you're going to need for that problem.
So we have one of your Flex Pulse, we have a bunch of those Flex Pulse units, which are battery operated, rechargeable, portable, and with a wire that goes to the magnetic pad, you can put it almost anywhere on your body. And we rent them out to people, so that way they can have it on longer time periods for pain. It seems to be working well for pain with our patients. Seems to be helping heal the fractures quicker.
Right.
And another thing, one of the things you have on that, it was an information sheet that shows like setting number 3 is only 3 cycles per second, and we've used that under people's pillow to help them sleep. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. When we go to sleep, well, when we're talking like you and I are talking now, and the listeners are listening and thinking and processing and learning and judging, you're in beta. You might also get into gamma, but most of the time you're going to be in beta.
So those are beta brainwaves. Beta
brainwaves. So they're fast brainwaves, typically somewhere between 13 to 23 cycles per second.
Okay.
Then as you relax before you go to bed, you just chill out. Then you're going to dip down into, like, say, the 10 hertz, the alpha range.
Okay.
So alpha would be, say, between 8 hertz and 13 hertz. Then when you go below alpha, you're basically falling asleep. You don't have to, but your brain waves will be down at that level. That's called theta. So theta is between 5 and 8 hertz.
Okay.
Okay, and under 5 hertz, basically from 1 hertz to 4 hertz, is delta. And during sleep, we go into delta, typically slow wave sleep it's called. We go into delta typically about an hour to an hour and a half into sleep. And so then what happens is you stay in delta for probably about an hour and a half again, and then you come out of delta, and the rest of the night you're spending in theta. And there's REM and non-REM theta, so dream sleep and non-dream sleep. Before you go into delta, you have to go through theta, and that's non-REM sleep. That time is called non-REM sleep. Delta is considered non-REM sleep as well. You're not dreaming.
Okay.
So the way that I designed the Flex Pulse is having had experience using all kinds of brain stimulation technologies over the years. I discovered that the brain doesn't like training wheels. In other words, if you're presenting the brain with a bunch of frequencies, that you're telling the brain what you want it to do, not what the brain wants to be doing.
Okay. And
so what you're doing is you try to coax the brain and let the brain do what it needs to do to get to where you want to be. So it's called frequency following.
Okay.
Okay, frequency following is called entrainment. And the analogy of entrainment is that the radio signals are floating around in the atmosphere, right, at various frequencies.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a dial, a radio dial, and you're trying to find the station. And as you're coming into your station, as you start to pick up parts of the station on the edges of the signal, you hear a fuzz. And then gradually they start to hear something specific, somebody talking, for example, or music. And as you get to the sweet spot of that signal, then you lock in. So that's called entrainment. And when you lock in, the signal actually starts to amplify. Right? So once you're locked in, it's amplified.
Okay.
And that's what we're doing with tuning the brain. We're trying to get the brain to match the signal that we're giving it. And the brain is very flexible. So if I present, I'll tap on my desk again. If I present the brain this signal, and I keep doing that, what's going to happen to the brain?
It should follow it.
It should slow down.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If I go like this, it's more alerting to the brain. And if the brain wants to listen to it, it's going to have to work harder to listen to that faster signal than it has to do to listen to the slow signal.
So this would be another way to maybe get a desired response without medication. If you were having trouble sleeping, you could maybe try one of these flex pulse magnets under the pillow, and it can
at 3 hertz at the delta frequency.
Right.
So when you put that under the pillow, the brain starts to listen to that signal, because this magnetic field from that little coil is now going through the brain.
Right.
It's going all the way through the brain. As it passes through the brain, it's sort of causing, in a sense, some motion of the waves, the natural waves of the brain. And the brain begins to follow down into that lower level of frequency. So you're going to dip down into delta and you sleep much faster. So if you have trouble falling asleep, you'll fall asleep better faster by having the delta signal. Now, if you happen to be waking early, and this is the problem that most people have, is waking early, what happens then is that you're going to end up in theta. An analogy would be swimming near the surface of the water versus swimming like 4 feet into the water.
Right.
Right? And so when you rise up in your sleep, and now you're aware that you're sleeping, you're aware of your dreams, you are in high theta. So when you present the brain all night long, that delta frequency, it basically then becomes like a tether, like a weight on the swimmer. So the swimmer's trying to swim at the surface, but now this weight is pulling the swimmer down to swim lower down below the surface. Now, maybe that's not a good analogy because you want to gasp for air, but you don't have to do that with dreaming and sleeping.
So overall, people get a more restful night's sleep quicker. They get to the restful stage and stay there better.
And stay there better. Correct.
That's pretty awesome.
And we find this to be routine.
Wow.
Can you split the electrodes and put one under one person's pillow and one under their sleeping partner's?
So the answer is yes and no. The yes is that when you split the coil, each coil is about 100 Gauss. So when the magnetic field, or the power coming from that unit, is 100% going to one coil. But when you put in 2 coils, it's split evenly into the 2 coils. So if you need 200 Gauss to induce sleep for you, then it may not work as well for you if you're only doing 100 Gauss.
Well, and I think you mentioned
you can try it and see.
Yeah, and I think in your paper you had said that the size of a 200 Gauss was about like a basketball, and if you split it, then you're down to about a softball, so it may not even make it all the way through the pillow into your brain, right?
Well, it will.
It will?
It will. But what happens is that, I mentioned before about cold and heat and ice and so on, even radiation drops off extraordinarily rapidly. That's called the inverse square law. So what happens is as it moves farther and farther and farther away from your brain, the signal gets weaker and weaker and weaker. And if you're only starting at 100 Gauss, and let's say you need 50 Gauss to do the best strength of entrainment for yourself. Because entrainment is not just the signal, not the frequency, it's also the strength of the signal.
Okay.
Right? Like with a radio. If the antenna is too far away, you're going to barely hear the signal. So that's the risk. So you have to find out for yourself what intensity you need relative to the signal dropping off with distance. So you're not going to get the same level of benefit by putting that coil under 2 pillows.
Gotcha.
As you will by putting it on top of the pillow that you lay on. But putting it on top of the pillow you lay on may be a little uncomfortable. So if you have 2 pillows and your top pillow is thinner than your bottom pillow, then put it under the top pillow inside the pillow cover. So if you have 2 of those, which is what I often do, I will take 2 coils and put them under my pillow. But you'll get much stronger action with 2 coils stacked.
Okay.
So even though each coil is 100 Gauss, when you stack 2 coils, they actually add to each other somewhat. So you may, instead of getting 200 Gauss, you'll get 230, 240 Gauss with them stacked.
Is that how you would recommend using the flex pulse for pain as well, is stacking them?
Yes and no. Again, so stacking, if you have a pinpoint problem, if you have a tennis elbow or a carpal tunnel, stack them. Right? But if you have 2 areas of pain, you have a choice. Do you try to do 2 areas at the same time? Or do you do one area first and another area next? So that's a matter of personal preference and experimentation as well. So one area may only need 100 Gauss to get a benefit, but the other area does need the 200 Gauss to get better.
Or you could maybe come to our clinic and get treated with a bigger machine.
You could. Now, the challenge with your bigger machine is if you have a chronic problem, let's say you have a non-union, you're going to need to go to your bigger machine daily, because people who use non-union treatment do it daily.
Right.
You're going to need to go daily for upwards of 2 or 3 months.
It gets to be expensive.
It gets to be too expensive. Mm-hmm. So at some point you have to say, well, do I need to get my own equipment? But otherwise, yes, if you have surgery, then I would say go to the clinic for 5 to 10 sessions, and then you'll be done.
So that's why we usually sell packages. So again, to the listeners, if you have just joined us, we're talking to Dr. Bill Pawluk from the Maryland area. He's the national expert on pulsed electromagnetic fields. And this is brought to you by the Ozone Clinic O3 Plus Texas, o3plustx.com. Our number is 210-558-7778. If you're having any of the issues that we're talking about, please make an appointment. Call Terry here in our clinic and get an appointment with Kim, our nurse practitioner. Kim Engelman has been to courses to learn all about this, and we are talking with Dr. Pawluk, who taught some of the courses that we've been listening about. So with let's see, we got pain, post-operative pain and swelling, non-union, sleep. What are some of the other things that the magnets are used for?
Let's talk about post-operative pain and swelling. Any injury, any cut, wound, etc., like surgical wounds especially, this is an ideal place for magnetic field therapy. You'll recover in half the time.
Wow. And they have, so we're saying this now, again, we have to say that some of these things that we're talking about are not FDA approved, but a lot of these are. And so they have do they have human studies that show that, or is animals, or what do you have?
Or which?
Post-operative pain and swelling and.
Those are human studies. It's FDA approved. There's a device called a Diapulse, and there are derivative devices like that use very high frequency fields. They're very inconvenient. The way they market them it's really just a shame because they're just not available. And they're throwaways. So you spend $200, $300, $400 for a machine that's basically useless like a month later.
So this is one of the real benefits of your website, because you've evaluated all these different machines, and you can guide people to what will work the best for their condition. Is that correct?
I enjoy it.
Okay.
So I'm still practicing medicine, right?
Well, and then
Yeah,
and that's why you're recognized as a national expert, because you've evaluated all these different things. There's one that somebody talks to us frequently about, and they come in and they say they have a beamer. Can you tell me what that is?
Yes. Beamers are what we call, I call basically legacy systems. So there are a number of pieces of equipment that are in that sort of category of extremely low intensity magnetic fields. So there's the beamer, the QRS, or now they call it the New Wave or something, IMRS, Medithera, and we have a comparable device that's actually 10 times stronger than most of those, which is called the BioBalance. So their whole body. And again, their legacy, they've been developed 25 years ago based on some animal studies and test tube studies. And doing an animal or a test tube, especially doing a mouse or a rat, they're tiny compared to a human body. And so following the inverse square law, those legacy systems are inadequate. I mentioned that you need 15 Gauss for an optimal magnetic field intensity to reduce inflammation.
Right.
But if you're only starting with 1 Gauss, it's just not going to be good enough. So they do, most of those systems I have discovered over the years, having trained in acupuncture, is that most of what they are doing is stimulating sensory receptors in the skin. And therefore, they're stimulating the acupuncture points and meridians.
Okay.
Which is a good thing, but it's not very intense stimulation. But still, it works, and people often feel a lot of benefit from it. But it's not doing almost any healing work for you. Certainly, it's not going to heal deeper into your body. So if you had a TBI, a brain injury, it's not going to help a whole lot. It makes you feel a little bit better, but it's not going to help to heal the tissue. So that's the problem with acupuncture. It doesn't heal the tissue. It stimulates systems to activate different processes in the body, including pain killing. But it doesn't heal, and that's why I basically have stopped doing acupuncture therapy and now only do magnetics, because I discovered early on that the magnetic fields will stimulate an acupuncture point and heal the tissue.
Gotcha. So
So the beamer type systems the intensities are way too low. And then the other problem with them is they're too expensive for what you get.
Okay.
So the beamer gets to be between $5,000 and $6,000. IMRS is around over $5,000. So you're spending $5,000 to $6,000 for one Gauss. And you need 15, a minimum of 15 at the skin, minimum. Never mind going deeper into a joint or into a back or a neck or a brain, a heart, a gut. All magnetic field therapy can help all those organs, all those tissues.
So let's say what if you have chronic back pain, you had an injury, you come into our clinic, you get, treatment for, 5-10 sessions or whatever, you get better, but now you need something for the rest of your life, kind of. You have some systems that can help a person stay more pain-free?
Yes. So we have low-intensity systems, medium-intensity systems, and high-intensity systems. And we have high-intensity systems that are unaffordable for most people, like the one you have.
Okay.
Right? And then we have other high-intensity systems that get upwards of 4,000 or 7,000 Gauss that are relatively affordable. And we have those on our website. For example, one of them, I'll give you a name. It's called the PARMEDS Multi-Flash. So the PARMEDS Multi-Flash is priced at $5,000, and it gives you 4,000 Gauss, peak intensity.
Pretty good.
So it's relatively affordable. It's all relative, right? It's relatively affordable.
Is it a mat?
Huh?
Is it a mat or what is it?
No, it's a partial system. It's a local system, I call it.
Okay, like a component, you got like a ring or something that'll work.
Yeah, you have a 12-inch ring, and then you can configure it and shape it in different ways. You can put it around your head, around your back, across your shoulders, up and down your lower spine or your upper spine, your cervical spine. You can put it down an arm. You can actually wrap it around a joint. So there's all kinds of ways to take this circle and manipulate it to the form of the part of the body that you want to treat. So that's high intensity. That's good enough for most people. Let me give you an example of the problem with dropping off of the magnetic field. I mentioned 15 Gauss.
Right.
And that's in my blog on my website, the adenosine blog on my website. There are tables on that blog. So if you have to treat let's say if you want to treat across the brain, somebody who has Parkinson's, somebody who had a head injury, seizure disorder, whatever, you want to treat across the brain. How far is it across? About 6 inches for most people.
Okay.
Average. So if you want to go across 6 inches to get entirely across the brain to make your treatments more efficient, you need about 4,000 Gauss.
Wow.
Now, if you don't have 4,000 Gauss, let's say you only have 2,000, then you're going to have to treat one side of the brain for a while, and then you're going to have to treat the other side of the brain for a while. And you may need to do 30 minutes on one side, 30 minutes on the other side, twice a day. Mm-hmm. So if you have the right intensity system from the get-go, then you make your treatment time much more efficient. So 6 inches across the brain requires 4,000 Gauss.
Gotcha.
So I routinely recommend the multi-flash system to treat brain stuff. It's also a good distance for the heart. So if you have heart failure or angina, cardiomyopathy.
And the reason all these are working, I think you had said that it stimulates better ATP production. Is that correct?
All magnetic fields do, but the higher the intensity, the more production. And, of course, the deeper into the body, you'll produce the ATP. And but ATP magnetic field therapy it's good for ATP, and it restores mitochondrial function. Okay. But the problem is ATP is a very short-lived molecule. Right? We make our body weight in ATP every day. Our body weight.
Wow.
It recycles. Every ATP molecule in the body recycles between 200 to 500 times a day.
Okay.
So when you do magnetic therapy, you're stimulating ATP, and then after half an hour, the benefit's gone. So if athletes did magnetic field therapy before they competed, before they trained, they would be able to train and compete much better. And then if they do the treatment again after they've done the training and done the competition, they recover faster. I'll give you an anecdote. A friend of mine who was working with magnetic fields was an Olympic doctor. He supported our American Olympic teams. And he couldn't understand the East Germans and the Russians would have competitions and workouts and tryouts. and they'd be back the next day like robots, bounce right back up again. Our athletes would take 2 to 3 days to recover.
Wow.
So he couldn't figure out why they could do that and we couldn't. He went past their camp and they were all laying on magnetic devices.
So now we use them, right?
Nope.
No? Why not?
Because they have team doctors.
Oh, well, why does that matter?
They don't listen.
Oh. Wow.
They're stuck. They're stuck in a way of doing things.
With all the basketball going on right now, you would think that everybody would be being on their magnets before and after the game. So,
well, unfortunately, the Beamer is multi-level marketing, and they're very aggressive, and they're not well trained. They really don't know what they're talking about, and they don't even know what the intensity of their machine is. You ask them what the intensity is. I don't know, because they're not taught that. But they don't want to talk about it anyway because it's 1 Gauss. You're paying $6,000 for 1 Gauss.
But the coaches and the trainers ought to know about the systems that you're talking about.
Well, yes, but we have to get to the trainers, and they have to open their brains, be willing to listen, and there is plenty of evidence, but they have to be willing to listen. They're stuck in their ruts as well, and they're guided by the orthopedists and the sports medicine doctors, right, who are also not listening. So, yes, we want to be able to gain access. They should be able to do better. I had a friend, actually, who is number 3 in the world with driving golf balls. Wow. There's a competition for that. John Daly used to win it regularly. So this guy was number 3 in the world. He played at that level internationally, number 3, into his 40s. He was using magnetic therapy before competitions and to recover afterwards.
Awesome. Okay, so we've got healing, we have pain, inflammation, reduction of pain and inflammation, sleep, overall performance. What about longevity, something like that?
Magnetic field therapy is just naturally anti-aging because it fixes anything that's out of whack. So if you have a home-based magnetic system, preferably a reasonably high-intensity home-based system, BioBalance is reasonable for that. That's on our website. There's another one called PowerMeds Home that's actually a very good bargain for the intensity. So if you're doing magnetic field therapy on a regular basis, you're fixing things before you even notice. I'm sure you could identify with this. How many cells have to be damaged for you to notice that you're getting an ingrown nail?
Boy, I don't know.
How many cells do we have in our body?
I don't know that one either.
About 100 trillion.
Okay.
All right, 100 trillion cells. So if you figure the left little toe is developing an ingrown toenail, how many cells have to be damaged for that ingrown toenail to be noticed by your brain? Millions. So the rule of thumb is, given the concept of cell injury, cells have to be damaged to a point where you get to a point of non-recovery. In other words, you really start to notice it. So you have to have enough cells talking to your brain for the brain to finally notice it. So if you're doing magnetic field therapy on a regular basis, those cells that are starting to get a little out of whack, get a little unbalanced, get a little cell injury going on, if they're getting treatment every day, they don't progress to that point. So you're preventing problems. You're preventing a lot of problems that you would never even know were happening.
Okay. So here in our
that means it's anti-aging.
Okay. And so what about... So, again, for the listener, if you just joined us, we're talking to Dr. Bill Pawluk, expert in post-electromagnetic field therapy, and he knows a lot about healing and regeneration and longevity. So what about in our clinic here at O3 Texas, which the phone number is 210-558-7778, if we did a combination of, say, nutrient therapy, like with Myers cocktails, and ozone therapy, and the post-electromagnetic field, you can stack all those things, can't you?
Absolutely. They're all synergistic. There was a study actually done in Cuba looking at arthritis, treating arthritis with ozone. And they did a study with ozone and PEMF and discovered that the results were better with the combination.
Excellent.
Now you can't build a house without bricks and mortar.
So you got to have the building blocks and then you add to it.
And then you add the energy to it.
And that's, to me, the key right there. Like you mentioned, mitochondria, that's where the energy is produced. And here we are adding energy to the system to enhance the production of ATP with the mitochondria, whether it be from ozone, PEMF, all the different nutrients, everything like that.
Totally. So the body needs energy to repair and heal.
So we got about 4 more minutes, and I want to ask a couple more questions. What if a person has a pacemaker? Can you use a PEMF unit?
So this is a cloudy issue. So what happens is there are a lot of pacemakers today and implanted electronics that are MR conditional. So if your doctor tells you you cannot do an MRI, then you have to be really careful with using a magnetic field around it. As long as you stay probably within 1 foot to 2 feet away from the control unit, you should be fine.
So if you had a foot problem, you could treat that, but not a
foot
broken
or a knee or even a hip, you could treat that. But you can't have the applicators up around the control unit.
Gotcha. How about if you got say a rod or maybe an artificial hip? Does the titanium hip affect this?
So I have a blog on my website about joint replacements. Everybody with a joint replacement should have a magnetic field unit at home.
Really?
Why?
I guess it helps. You're going to tell us.
They fail.
Oh, yeah.
They have a lifespan of 10 or 15 years. So why do they have a lifespan of 10 or 15 years? Because how does the body like a foreign body?
Inflammation around it.
Exactly. So the inflammation around these implants causes osteolysis, which is the breakdown of bone. So over time, then this implant starts to loosen up, and then you have to have revision surgery. And revision surgery is always worse than the original surgery.
But and the magnetic field won't cause pain or anything because of the metal in there, right?
Not because of the metal. Usually it's not because of the metal itself, although I do have to say that I had an experience of touching a spoon to a filling. Have you ever done that?
Yes.
Yes, it's not pleasant. So I had a strong magnetic coil near my head, and I have 3 implants. And ouch, I had a spark. So the answer is you need it to prevent the osteolysis, but you need to control the intensity so you don't have pain and discomfort. Gotcha. And if you have pain and discomfort, it depends on how intolerable it is, because magnetic field therapy doesn't cause problems, it reveals problems.
One last question, and that's how does this relate to like you mentioned, there's electromagnetic fields around the power lines. Now they're talking about 5G and all that kind of stuff. What can you say about that?
Well, PEMFs are not EMFs.
Okay.
EMFs are environmental magnetic fields. I call it EMFs, environmental magnetic fields. Now, they're electromagnetic fields, but they're very high frequency. That's why I call them environmental. They're not known to nature. So they are very high frequency, which means they get absorbed by the body and they cause damage to the body. Magnetic field therapy is extremely low frequency, not high frequency. And because of that, magnetic field therapy protects the body from the effects of EMFs. It doesn't shield it completely. You can't block it. Right? You can't be walking around in a metal Faraday cage, what we call Faraday cage.
Right.
So the best thing to do is to treat yourself on a regular basis, anti-aging as well, and amplify, fortify the body, the natural body's functions to be able to withstand and to deal with the reactions of the stimulus that you get. 5G is particularly bad, obviously, because it's very high intensity and frequency, and therefore it absorbs even more into the body.
So we'll need more protection as we move along. Well, everybody, I've been talking to Dr. William Pawluk, Bill Pawluk, and you can go to his website, which is drpawluk.com. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and get more information from our website, o3plustx.com, to learn more about coming in and getting magnetic field therapy, or go to the radio website, which is DrFrankCuttingEdgeMedicine.com. Bill, thanks so much for being here. We learned a lot. There's a lot to learn, and I'm sure that you have instructional videos on your website that will help us as well, correct?
Absolutely. And we're coming out with a new book, hopefully by the end of the year, on another book on PEMF therapy that's more of a manual, a how-to.
Excellent.
The first book is much more informational. The second book is really more how-to.
All right. Thanks so much for being here. Everybody, we'll see you next week. Take care.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.